The galaxy had seen many rise and fall. Ancient civilizations, once mighty and awe-inspiring, had crumbled under the weight of their own ambition, or been swallowed by the vast, indifferent expanse of space. Among the stars, the Elythians were the oldest of them all. These wise and ageless beings had watched the cycles of galactic life unfold for eons, quietly observing from the shadows, with an understanding of the universe far beyond any other species. Their knowledge was vast, and their experience unparalleled. In all their years, they had never seen a species like humanity. The Elythians had long held a deep belief that humans were a volatile race. Though they were capable of extraordinary feats, their emotions often overpowered their logic, leading them to make reckless decisions. They saw the human thirst for power and conquest, the raw unpredictability of their actions, and the destructive potential that lay in their hearts. The Elythians knew that one day, the humans would step into the galactic arena, and when they did, it could mean disaster. A meeting of the Galactic Council, where the universe's most advanced species gathered to discuss matters of peace, trade, and war. The Elythians spoke with caution. Their leader, Elandros, a being whose form shimmered with a translucent glow, stood before the assembly, his voice calm, but filled with an urgency that made the other members uneasy. He had come to warn them. "Humanity," he began, his voice echoing through the vast hall, "is a species of great promise, but they are driven by emotion. Passion, anger, desire, these forces push them forward, often without thought of the consequences. If you allow them to enter the intergalactic stage, you risk unleashing something that could change the course of the galaxy forever. They will not bend to your laws or your tactics. They will fight with a ferocity you cannot imagine." The council was silent, but not out of fear. Instead, there was a coldness, a certain dismissive air in the room. The Zarathians, an insectoid race with a deep military history, exchanged glances, and the Aurelian Syndicate, a network of traitors and mercenaries, muttered amongst themselves. Even the Corvian Council, a group of diplomats known for their pragmatic approach to diplomacy, looked unbothered. "We are all aware of humanity's potential," the voice of the syndicate leader, Kassara, interrupted. "But the Elythians are speaking from a place of fear, not understanding. Humans may be emotional, but they are also adaptable. They've shown time and again that they can rise to the occasion. Our resources and knowledge are far superior to theirs, and their systems of government are disorganized at best. We will not be threatened by them." Elandros, his form shimmering in the dim light, bowed his head slightly, acknowledging the dismissal, but his words remained firm. "You do not understand. Their unpredictability is their greatest strength. Where you see weakness, I see raw, untamed power. They do not follow rules. They will break them, shape them, and rewrite them as they see fit." But the council was unconvinced. A murmur of quiet agreement spread through the room. The Drexian Armada, a species of towering warriors with unmatched physical strength, were the first to speak in agreement. Their general, Thalrex, raised a hand, his deep voice booming across the hall. "Humans have no place here. They are small in numbers and weak compared to the great powers of the galaxy. You are right that they are unpredictable, but that does not make them dangerous. We have the might to crush them if they ever pose a true threat." The council, as one, agreed. The warnings from the Elythians were met with polite dismissal. Humanity was nothing more than a new, emerging species, struggling to find its place in the galactic order. The older races believed they would be of no consequence in the long run. In the wake of the council's decision, the humans continued their journey into the stars, unseen and underestimated. They had long ago begun their own efforts to stretch their influence across the galaxy. though their early attempts were seen as trivial. Captain Adira Tan, a young and determined commander, led a small fleet of human ships exploring uncharted regions of space. Humanity's weapons were primitive compared to the others, and their ships were no match for the superior technology of the galaxy's more advanced races. But what humans lacked in technology, they made up for with resilience and courage. Captain Tan and her crew weren't concerned with the opinions of the Galactic Council. They had a singular goal: to survive, to explore, and to prove themselves. As humanity continued to expand, they found themselves in skirmishes with other alien factions, mostly over territory and resources. These early battles were small, but they were telling. While the humans often lost, they never gave up. The enemy fleets were often puzzled by the recklessness with which the humans fought. Instead of retreating or negotiating, the humans would press on with ferocity, surprising their enemies and even dealing damage despite being outclassed. Their unpredictability made them difficult to understand, and that made them dangerous. Still, the rest of the galaxy watched with mild amusement, thinking of humanity as little more than a nuisance. The Eridaxians, the ruthless military race of the galaxy, barely spared a thought for humanity as they prepared for their next conquest. They were too focused on the bigger players in the galaxy, the technologically advanced races who controlled vast stretches of the cosmos. But humanity, under the leadership of Captain Tan, was building. Each small victory, each battle fought against seemingly impossible odds, was a step toward something greater. Tan's crew learned quickly from every encounter, making adjustments, developing new tactics, and reinforcing their resolve. They knew they were being watched, but instead of being discouraged, they used that as motivation. They had something the other races did not: a burning desire to prove themselves, not to the Council or the Alithians, but to the galaxy itself. Back in the Council chambers, the Alithians watched with growing concern. Despite all their wisdom, they couldn't foresee what was happening. The humans were evolving faster than any of them had predicted. They began to feel the weight of their warnings, but the galaxy had already dismissed them. The rise of humanity was inevitable, and they would soon learn that dismissing a species driven by passion and will was a grave mistake. As the days passed, Captain Tan and her fleet were readying themselves for something much larger. The Galactic Council's dismissal was no longer a concern to them. The humans had long since moved beyond needing anyone's approval. The galaxy would soon feel the consequences of their refusal to listen. And as the story unfolded, the Alithians could only watch as the tide of the galaxy began to shift, one small human victory at a time. The galaxy had been at peace for what seemed like an eternity, a fragile calm that covered the vast expanse like a thin veneer. But peace, as it often does, shattered with a single brutal act. The Eridaxian Empire, a war-hungry, militaristic race known for their ruthless tactics and unrivaled strength, declared war on the Galactic Council. It wasn't a declaration made lightly. The Eridaxians had been plotting for years, slowly amassing power and resources, watching the galaxy's balance with growing disdain. They believed that the Council, with its various fractured factions and hesitant alliances, was ripe for conquest. The Eridaxians were confident they could crush any resistance that stood in their way. However, the Alithians, who had long played the role of peacekeepers and advisors to the Council, moved swiftly. They knew the Eridaxians' might, and they feared that such a war would plunge the galaxy into chaos, unmaking everything they had worked to preserve. With their immense knowledge and diplomatic prowess, the Alithians proposed a temporary alliance, a coalition of the galaxy's forces to stand against the Eridaxian onslaught. But the Council was not quick to respond. In truth, many of its members were reluctant to trust the Alithians, who they saw as too old-fashioned and too cautious in their approach. Some even viewed the Alithians as meddling, interfering in matters that didn't concern them. Still, the threat was undeniable, and the Council reluctantly agreed to join the alliance. But there was a catch: the humans were also part of this alliance. Humanity, still relatively new to intergalactic politics, had gained a reputation for being wild, unpredictable, and, most notably, undisciplined. Many of the galaxy's older species looked down on humans, dismissing them as primitive, unrefined creatures with little understanding of the delicate balance of power that governed the stars. The humans were seen as little more than cannon fodder, useful for numbers, perhaps, but not capable of real impact. Captain Adira Tan, the leader of a modest human fleet, felt the weight of the galaxy's dismissal, but she refused to let it define her. She knew that humanity had something the others didn't, something that the Eridaxians could never anticipate. As the war began, humanity's place in the alliance felt precarious. The human fleet, a mix of ships and technologies far behind those of the other races, stood ready to face the might of the Eridaxians, who had prepared their forces for an easy, crushing victory. In the first battle, humanity's ships were torn apart. The Eridaxians, with their advanced weapons and disciplined tactics, annihilated human forces without breaking a sweat. The Council watched the destruction with little concern, expecting it to be the end of humanity's brief involvement in galactic affairs. After all, they were just humans. They were bound to fall, weren't they? But Captain Tan had other plans. While the other species followed their traditional military strategies, relying on well-rehearsed tactics and technology, humanity did not. The humans didn't fight like anyone else. They didn't follow the rules or the expected patterns of war. Instead, they embraced chaos, harnessing the very thing the galaxy feared most: their raw, untamed will. They weren't constrained by what was deemed proper or safe. They fought with unpredictability and ferocity, using guerrilla tactics that threw the Eridaxians into confusion. Instead of making calculated attacks or forming tight defensive lines, the humans launched attacks without warning, disappearing into the dark void of space before their enemies could retaliate. They set traps, misdirected their movements, and struck with a speed that seemed almost random, yet deeply effective. In the midst of all this chaos, something unexpected happened. The humans began to win. One skirmish after another, they managed to turn the tide in ways that defied conventional military wisdom. What the galaxy didn't understand was that humanity didn't fight for glory, nor did they fight for the approval of the Council or the Alithians. They fought because they had to. Their survival was on the line, and when a species is driven to the edge, it becomes something more. Humans didn't fight for power. They fought for the sheer joy of proving they could survive, and that in itself became their greatest strength. They fought with desperation in their veins and determination in their hearts, refusing to bow to any foe, no matter how powerful. The Eridaxians, who had been confident in their ability to crush the humans, began to falter. They didn't know how to predict them, how to control them. Their own tactics, which had always been successful against other species, no longer worked. The humans didn't follow any of the rules they had been taught: rules about fighting, rules about strategy. They did the unexpected and took advantage of the smallest gaps in their enemy's armor. Each victory, no matter how small, began to build on the last. The Council, once dismissive of humanity, began to pay attention. The humans were winning battles, and they were doing it with an intensity and passion that the other species simply couldn't replicate. It was as if the human spirit, their unwillingness to give up, was a weapon in itself. They didn't just fight with their weapons, they fought with their hearts, and that made them dangerous. For the first time in the war, the Eridaxians were the ones caught off guard. On the ground, in the heart of the battlefield, Captain Tan and her crew led the charge. She was a symbol of humanity's unexpected power, strong-willed, unyielding, and with a mind that refused to be confined by tradition. She didn't see the war as a contest of weapons, but a test of wills. She knew that as long as humanity refused to back down, they could win. And with every victory, she proved the galaxy wrong. The turning point came when Captain Tan led an audacious strike against an Eridaxian supply depot, hidden deep within enemy territory. It was a mission that no one thought possible. The human fleet infiltrated the heavily guarded base, crippled their supply lines, and then disappeared without a trace, leaving the Eridaxian fleet stranded and disorganized. It was a move so daring, so outside of what anyone had anticipated, that it left the Eridaxians reeling. With this victory, humanity had made its mark. The galaxy began to take notice, and the Eridaxians could no longer underestimate the humans. What had once been a hopeless cause was now becoming a growing threat, one that no one could ignore. The humans had awakened something in the galaxy, an energy, a drive, that no one could tame. And as the war raged on, humanity would prove once and for all that they were no longer to be dismissed. The battlefield had become a place of chaos, yes, but also a place where humanity thrived, using its greatest weapon, unpredictability. The humans had not just survived the first battles, they had won them. And the galaxy was starting to understand that they were a force to be reckoned with. The war that had once seemed like a certain victory for the Eridaxians was no longer as clear-cut as they had expected. What began as a straightforward conquest had quickly spiraled into a nightmare for the invaders. Humanity's unorthodox style of combat had thrown everything into disarray. The Eridaxian military, known for its rigid structure and unyielding strategies, struggled to adapt. They had anticipated that the human forces would follow predictable patterns, that they would conform to the laws of warfare that every other species abided by. But humanity refused to be confined. Instead of the expected conventional battle tactics, they fought in ways that made no sense at first glance, strategies that seemed reckless, disjointed, and chaotic. Yet, as time went on, these methods were starting to work. The forefront of this revolution in warfare was Captain Adira Tan. Her fleet had become a symbol of resistance, not through sheer strength, but through creativity and raw will. She was a commander who saw opportunity where others saw failure, and her crew followed her without question. In one of the most daring missions of the war, Captain Tan led her forces to strike deep behind Eridaxian lines, aiming to take down one of their most formidable warships. The Eridaxians had considered the ship untouchable, a symbol of their dominance in the war. It was heavily fortified, surrounded by layers of defense systems that seemed impossible to breach. Yet Tan's crew, using their unpredictable tactics, found a flaw, a small vulnerability in the ship's shield generators. It was a mistake that no one could have predicted, not even the Alithians, who had been watching the conflict closely. Under the cover of darkness, Tan's fleet launched a surprise attack, catching the Eridaxians off guard. The human ships, smaller and less advanced, moved with a speed and precision that didn't match their technological advantage, but they did not need to. They had learned the art of patience and timing, two things that had never been necessary for the Eridaxians. It wasn't just about firepower anymore. It was about exploiting every weakness and turning it into a strength. The Eridaxians, once so confident in their technological superiority, found themselves in a fight that no one had prepared them for. The warship fell, a mighty blow to the Eridaxian Empire, and the shockwaves rippled through the galaxy. The Alithians, who had been watching the battle unfold from afar, could no longer ignore what was happening. Once dismissive of humanity's role in the war, they now found themselves filled with a growing sense of dread. The humans were evolving in ways that no one had expected. Where they once stumbled and fumbled, they were now moving with purpose. They were adapting faster than any species the Alithians had ever observed. Every battle was a lesson, and humanity learned from its mistakes in real time. Each victory and defeat was studied, analyzed, and then turned into a new strategy or technology. What began as desperation was now becoming a rapid evolution of tactics and innovation. Humanity was no longer a fringe participant in the war, they were becoming a decisive force. The Eridaxians had always relied on overwhelming strength, but humanity had shown them that there was more to war than just power. The humans had something that the Eridaxians didn't: a deep, unyielding will to win at any cost. They were not bound by the same rules, nor did they have the same sense of honor that other species respected. Humanity was driven by something more primal: the need to survive and to prove themselves. This was their strength, their greatest weapon, and it was starting to tilt the war in their favor. In the wake of the warship's destruction, the tide truly began to turn. The Eridaxians were no longer so sure of their victory. Their military tactics, which had been so effective against other races, were now being countered with stunning precision by the humans. They had underestimated humanity's potential, and now they were paying the price. As the Eridaxian High Command scrambled to develop countermeasures, the human forces were already several steps ahead, devising new weapons and strategies that further capitalized on their strengths. But it wasn't just on the battlefield that humanity was evolving. The once hesitant and reluctant species began to form alliances with others who had, until now, stayed on the sidelines. Many of the smaller factions, the ones who had feared the might of the Eridaxians, began to see humanity not as a liability, but as an asset. The unpredictable humans were no longer something to fear, they were becoming the catalyst for victory. Species that had once viewed humanity with disdain now recognized that this unpredictable race might hold the key to defeating the Eridaxians. The Marans, a race of highly intelligent beings known for their peaceful nature, approached Captain Tan with an offer of alliance. They had watched humanity's rise with growing admiration, and now they wanted to stand beside them. The Varkari, a fierce warrior species, once neutral in the conflict, also pledged their forces to the human cause, seeing in humanity a tenacity that mirrored their own. Even the Exinthar, a race known for their advanced technology but disorganized political structure, saw an opportunity in joining the humans, eager to have a force that would challenge the status quo and inspire a new kind of unity. As humanity's alliances grew, so too did their military strength. They began to draw on the creativity that had always been part of their nature, using their ability to innovate and improvise in ways the other races had not even considered. Human engineers worked tirelessly, adapting existing technology and inventing new weapons. The early human ships, simple and unimpressive, were refitted with new technologies, and their weapons evolved rapidly. What had once been clumsy and ineffective tactics now became sharp and deadly strategies. The humans were no longer playing catch-up. They were ahead of the curve. Captain Tan, at the helm of this new force, knew that the war was far from over. But the gap between humanity and their enemies had closed. The Eridaxians, who had once felt invincible, now found themselves struggling to keep pace with a species they had once dismissed as inferior. The tide was turning, but not in the way they had anticipated. The humans had become more than just a thorn in their side. They had become the hammer that could break the Eridaxian Empire's hold on the galaxy. The Eridaxians' high command, scrambling to come up with new strategies, now had to ask themselves one terrifying question: had they underestimated humanity for too long? The war that had once seemed so simple was now becoming a battle for survival on both sides. The humans, with their willpower and creativity, had changed the game. And as the battles raged on, the galaxy was beginning to realize that humanity was no longer a side player in the war. They were the ones changing the outcome, one victory at a time. The war had been raging for years, and now the galaxy was on the edge of destruction. The Aridaxian Empire, having lost battle after battle to humanity's unpredictable tactics, had decided it was time for a final, decisive strike. The last bastion of the Galactic Council's defense, a massive space station at the edge of Council territory, stood between the Aridaxians and complete victory. If they could break through this last line of defense, the galaxy would be theirs. The Aridaxians threw everything they had at it, hundreds of warships, advanced weapons, and their finest commanders. The Galactic Council and its allies, including humanity, were all that stood between the Aridaxians and total domination. The fate of the galaxy hung in the balance. In the face of this overwhelming force, Captain Adira Tan knew the stakes had never been higher. Her crew, battered but not broken, was ready to fight. They had always been the underdogs, and now they were humanity's last hope. The Alithians, who had been observing from a distance for so long, finally offered their assistance, offering advanced technology that could turn the tide in humanity's favor. Their ships, their weapons, their knowledge, they were willing to provide it all. But to everyone's surprise, Captain Tan refused. "This is our fight," she said, her voice firm. "We'll win it on our terms." The humans had come this far without relying on anyone else's power or technology, and they weren't about to change now. The Alithians, who had once dismissed humanity as an unpredictable, volatile species, were taken aback by her decision. They knew the risk involved. This would be the most difficult battle humanity had ever faced. But Captain Tan's resolve was absolute. She believed in her people, in their ability to fight not just with their weapons, but with their heart. With the Aridaxian fleet approaching, Captain Tan gathered her commanders and laid out her audacious plan. It was high risk, nearly impossible, but if it worked, it would cripple the Aridaxians for good. The plan relied on misdirection, exploiting the Aridaxians' overconfidence. They had always expected humanity to fight by the rules, but Captain Tan knew better. Humanity had always thrived when the odds were against them, when they had to think outside the box. The strategy was simple but daring. A decoy fleet made up of smaller, less powerful ships would draw the Aridaxians' attention to one part of the battlefield, making them believe that was the real force. Meanwhile, the real human fleet, led by Tan herself, would strike at the heart of the Aridaxian command structure, their flagship and their command ship. It was a risky move, knowing that they would have only one shot at it. And if it failed, it would be the end of them. But if they succeeded, it would destroy the Aridaxian leadership and break their offensive in one swift blow. The plan was set into motion. The decoy fleet, full of bravado and firepower, engaged the Aridaxians in a feigned attempt at holding the line. The humans knew they couldn't win in a head-to-head battle, but they weren't looking for victory. They were looking for time. They engaged the enemy with reckless abandon, hoping to keep the Aridaxians distracted and away from the true objective. And the Aridaxians, believing the decoy fleet to be humanity's primary force, took the bait. Their firepower and energy were concentrated on destroying the decoy ships, all the while blind to the real threat closing in on them. Meanwhile, Captain Tan's fleet, hidden in the shadows of an asteroid field, maneuvered silently toward the heart of the Aridaxian formation. The human ships, agile and smaller than their Aridaxian counterparts, used the cover of space to remain undetected. With every passing moment, the tension grew, and Tan could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on her. This was their only chance. If they were discovered before they reached their target, they would be overwhelmed in an instant. As the final stage of the plan unfolded, the Aridaxians began to realize something was wrong. Their forces, focused on the decoy fleet, suddenly received distress signals from the rear. It was too late. The human fleet had breached their defenses and were closing in on their flagship. In a burst of light and fire, humanity's ships struck the heart of the Eridaxian command, overwhelming their forces with a precision that surprised even Captain Tan's own fleet. The humans, who had always been underestimated, now fought with a singular focus, a relentless drive that pushed them beyond their limits. They were no longer fighting for survival. They were fighting for the chance to rewrite the future of the galaxy. The Eridaxian flagship, the symbol of their might and control, was hit with a devastating barrage of fire from all sides. The once impenetrable ship now seemed vulnerable, its shields flickering as human vessels danced around it, launching attack after attack. The Eridaxian command structure began to crumble. Officers and commanders who had once been so sure of their victory were now scrambling, panicking as the realization set in. Without their leadership, their fleet was in disarray. The once cohesive and well-disciplined Eridaxian forces were now a chaotic mess, fighting with no direction, no guidance. Captain Tan's voice crackled over the comms. "This is humanity's moment. Finish it." Her crew, battle-weary but fueled by the thought of their people's future, pushed forward with a renewed intensity. The humans, using every trick they had learned in the past years, struck with unpredictable force, launching surprise attacks, sabotaging enemy systems, and exploiting every weakness. The battle reached its peak as the Eridaxian fleet began to fall apart. Ships that had once seemed invincible were now shattered, their command structure decimated. The final blow came when Captain Tan herself, aboard the human flagship, led a final assault directly into the heart of the Eridaxian command ship. Her forces surrounded the flagship, disabling its remaining defenses, and with a well-placed shot, they sent the ship into a fiery explosion. The battle ended in a triumphant roar from humanity's side. The Eridaxians, though not completely defeated, had lost their will to continue the fight. Their offensive was shattered, and they were forced to retreat. The galaxy watched in awe as humanity, once dismissed as a weak and unpredictable force, had not only survived, but had won the war. In the aftermath, the Alithians, who had been watching the battle unfold, could not deny the truth anymore. Humanity had done what no one else could. They had defeated the Eridaxian Empire on their own terms, with their own strength. The galaxy had changed forever. The humans had shown that their greatest strength wasn't in their technology or their numbers, it was in their unyielding determination to fight for the future of their people. They had not just survived, they had triumphed. The dust of the war had finally settled, but its echoes resonated across the galaxy. The Eridaxian Empire, once thought to be an unstoppable force, had been broken. Their fleet lay in ruins, their command shattered, and their once great power dismantled by the very species they had underestimated for so long. Humanity, against all odds, had not only survived the war, but had emerged victorious, reshaping the galaxy's balance of power forever. The Galactic Council, which had once laughed at the idea of humanity being a serious military force, now found itself facing a new reality. No longer were the humans just a bunch of unpredictable soldiers on the sidelines. They were now recognized as a dominant military power, one that could no longer be ignored. The Council, seeing the rise of this bold new power, offered humanity a seat at the table, an equal standing with the galaxy's most powerful races. The humans who had fought so fiercely for their survival were now poised to shape the future of the galaxy. Captain Adira Tan, the fearless leader who had guided humanity through the darkest days of the war, was offered a place of honor within the Council. But despite the accolades, despite the newfound respect from even the most ancient of species, Captain Tan remained unmoved. The Alithians, having observed the humans' ascent with awe, and perhaps a bit of fear, approached Captain Tan with a proposal. They offered knowledge, vast and ancient, that could propel humanity's technology and society forward at an extraordinary rate. Their understanding of the cosmos, their deep insights into the fabric of existence itself, could elevate humanity beyond anything they had imagined. With the Alithians' help, the humans could reach heights they had only dreamed of, achieving progress in mere decades that might have taken other species millennia. But Captain Tan's answer was simple, resolute. No, thank you. Humanity, she believed, had earned its place in the galaxy not through the help of others, but through their own strength, ingenuity, and willingness to fight against the odds. They had made their way through the war without relying on ancient powers or borrowed wisdom. It wasn't technology or mystical knowledge that had carried them to victory. It was their heart, their unbreakable will, and their ability to adapt when everything seemed impossible. They had learned from their mistakes, used their creativity to turn the tide of battle, and fought with the kind of passion that no amount of advanced knowledge could replicate. Humanity had proven that it was their independence that set them apart. They were not going to be the next species to simply bow to ancient wisdom. They were going to carve their own future. While some in the council were surprised by Captain Tan's refusal, others understood. They had watched humanity's rise from the beginning, and they knew that what made humanity special was not its adherence to the old ways, but its willingness to create new paths. The humans had proven that they could face down a superior enemy and win. They had done it with no ancient secrets, no advanced tricks. They had done it with what was uniquely theirs. And that was why humanity's destiny was its own. The final days of the war, and the days that followed, marked the beginning of a new era. Humanity was not just another species among many. It had become the future of the galaxy. With their newfound place among the stars, the humans began to explore the vastness of space, not as wanderers, but as conquerors of their own destiny. They forged new alliances with species that had once doubted them, offering not just military might, but something more: new ideas, fresh perspectives, and a spirit of exploration that could lead the galaxy into a brighter future. It was clear now that the humans had come into their own. They would no longer be content to be a small, overlooked species. Instead, they would lead, setting the pace for the galaxy's future. Humanity was not bound by the same rules that held other species back. They were bound only by their will and their desire to push forward into the unknown. And the galaxy, for all its ancient history and cosmic wisdom, could no longer ignore the rise of this unpredictable, powerful force. The humans, led by Captain Tan, were no longer just soldiers. They were trailblazers, explorers, and leaders. They had shown the galaxy that they could face insurmountable odds and come out victorious. And now, they would show the galaxy that their victory was not an accident. It was the beginning of something much larger. The galaxy would never be the same. Humanity had not just ascended, they had taken their place at the top, not by following the old ways, but by creating new ones. In the quiet moments after the war, as the humans looked out over the stars, Captain Tan stood at the helm of her ship. The future was uncertain, yes, but it was also wide open, full of endless possibilities. Humanity's strength, once questioned, was now undeniable. The galaxy was no longer a place where the powerful dictated the rules. Humanity was going to write its own rules, and they were going to do it their way. The Alithians, once the oldest and most respected race in the galaxy, were now humbled. They had seen the humans rise from nothing to become the rulers of the stars, and they knew that their time of dominance had passed. It was humanity's time now. The final scene of the story shows Captain Tan's ship, moving gracefully through the stars, her crew standing at attention as they look out at the vast unknown. Humanity, after defying all odds, had not only survived the war they had ascended, And now, as the galaxy watched in awe, the humans stood ready to take their place as the new dominant force, not through brute force alone, but through their unparalleled adaptability, their creativity, and their unwavering will to shape the future. The galaxy was theirs for the taking, and they would not be stopped. The warning of the Alithians had been ignored, and in the end, it was humanity's determination, courage, and heart that had allowed them to rise, unbroken and unbowed, to rule the stars.